As Nigeria celebrates record non-oil revenues and claims zero domestic borrowing in 2025, is the country truly turning a fiscal corner or just shifting the risks? We'll find out. Good morning and welcome to another power-packed episode of Business Week. It's been a whirlwind week of reforms, resignations, and revenue wins across Africa and globally. First, Zimbabwe secured a historic blueberry export deal with China, while Nigeria's Bureau of Public Enterprises announced plans to list Discos and Genco on the NGX. Over in Kenya, new oil blocks are up for grabs in the country's first licensing round under reformed petroleum laws. A bold move amid growing energy competition, if you ask me. Meanwhile, the gold market smashed records, soaring past $3,500 an ounce as investors chased safe havens. And in Ethiopia, the reformist central bank governor Mamo Miretu has resigned after a transformative tenure, and across the continent, across the pond, well, not across the pond, but up north, north of the world, UK's deputy prime minister also stepped down over a brewing tax controversy, stirring uncertainty in Westminster. And back here in Nigeria, the president has claimed the country no longer needs to borrow domestically from banks thanks to robust non-oil revenues. But as public debt balloons and the IMF urges caution, the question remains, is this progress or just a postponement of the pain? Well, if you missed the big business stories of the week, don't worry, I've got you covered. I'm Rolake Akinkugwe-Filani. Stay tuned. As always, we'll start with a look at global energy commodities. Take a look at Brent there, down by a whopping almost 5%, down from the previous week, down to $65 a barrel. Bearing in mind, Nigeria's budget benchmark is $75 a barrel. So we're at like $10 out here. But yes, so what is happening? Rising inventories, maybe easing tensions. Markets also seeing that the Fed may cut rates in Q4, anticipating that rate cuts are always good for commodities markets. WTI crude also down by almost 4% to $61.53. But natural gas held up pretty strongly, rising by 3.74% week on week. And RBOB gasoline also rose by 10.9% week on week. Let's take a look at equities markets, starting, of course, here in Nigeria. The all-share index was down by 0.94% week on week to finish at 138,980.01 points, over 24,000 deals, but that was still down almost 4% from the previous week. Volume of shares traded here at about 1.8 billion and the value at 15 billion, with a market capitalization on the NGX ending the week down by 0.94% to close at 87.93 trillion naira. Let's take a look at equities markets in Africa. Well, a mixed picture with Johannesburg and Accra not doing so well. Accra was actually down by 2% or thereabouts. Nairobi was up by 3.29%, and Casablanca was up by 0.17%. Now scooting over to the North American market. Well, Dow Jones Industrial Index close to flattish, but still a bit subdued there, down by 0.07%. Tech stocks neither here nor there in the past week. S&P 500 and the Nasdaq Composite was up 1.13% to my top picks from around the world. Interesting story developing here between China and the EU in a tussle over tariffs, taking a bit of the spotlight away from Trump. What's the issue here? China is slapping an up to 62%, I beg your pardon, tariff on EU pork imports. Right now, the pork imports into China from the EU are mostly coming from Spain, the Netherlands, Luxembourg, France. And China says that it is worried about dumping, right? This sort of policy where really low-cost, cheap imports flood the market of a particular country, undercutting their local manufacturers or producers of the same products. Now, China says this is a sort of measure to tackle the issue of the EU dumping its products into the Chinese market, so an anti-dumping tariff. But the EU sees this as retaliation for an imposition of tariffs on Chinese EVs into the EU market. So tit-for-tat tariffs here going. And of course, China is already facing tariff headwinds as a result of US action The EU is facing tariff headwinds as a result of US action. And now these two economic powers, the EU and China, are now slugging it out together. So the whole issue around imports, how will that happen? Well, already about 66% of EU exports of pork go to the Chinese market. So the EU is not really going to be liking this move, even though China has called it an initial and temporary measure. What is the final measure, right, out of this? We'll be watching this one very closely. Zimbabwe, still on China. Zimbabwe is to begin blueberry exports to China after a landmark deal. And if you've ever had blueberries, really lovely, lovely tasting fruit. And Zimbabwe is becoming quite a prolific manufacturer of blueberries on the African continent. Other countries in Asia, Latin America also export blueberries to the Chinese market. But this will see the amount of blueberries exported to the Chinese market from Zimbabwe almost hit 66,000 tons annually. Now, this is interesting because this is a real bid by the Zimbabwean government to really become a horticultural hub in the sub-Saharan Africa region. So this is good news that Zimbabwe has actually found this very important market and boosted its ability to serve this very important Chinese market with an important product such as blueberries. We're always looking to open up Africa to global export markets, particularly around soft commodities, agricultural commodities, and horticulture, which East Africa has been very strong on, but now clearly South Africa also wanting a piece of that pie. Nigeria's BPE is planning to list Discos and Gencos on the NGX for revenue. Of course, a big part of the current administration's drive is to boost revenues. So it's part of a bid by the BPE, the sort of public enterprise that drives privatization of public entities, to list or to privatize around 91 currently state-owned entities. Of course, in this case, the government has shares, significant stakes in the entities that will be listed, but there's also a sense in which they want to democratize public access via capital markets to some of the key strategic institutions, corporations that are helping to shore up Nigeria's power sector. And of course, we know the history of underperformance in the power sector. So how much will this move really help to open up that sector? Well, the one thing it does is if these companies are going to IPO on the NGX, issues around sort of financial reporting, governance, really, they have to put the house in order. So perhaps this is part of a long journey towards cleaning up the entire power sector. UK Deputy Prime Minister has actually resigned over a tax scandal. The Deputy Prime Minister, Angela Rayner, that's her name. And the story here is that she had underpaid £40,000 in stamp duty land tax on a property which she failed to declare as her main residence. Now, it's a very tricky one, and of course, it had been a scandal over the last few weeks. The Conservative government, led by Kemi Badenoch, had sort of capitalized on this to talk about Labour's shortcomings, and she was a deputy prime minister. Now she's actually gone and resigned over £40,000. Please try and convert that to Naira. Let's have a discussion here locally about such things. So essentially, there's been a broader cabinet reshuffle. Yvette Cooper has now taken over as foreign secretary because the former foreign secretary, David Lammy, is now being made the deputy prime minister. Of course, scandals like this in the global north are quite a big deal. And she's resigned and she's gone. Hopefully that puts paid to the issues and Labour can move on, but we'll see. It's quite a heated time in the UK. Our final story here in the top picks is that gold has hit another record historic high of $3,500 per ounce. So many factors driving gold as a safe haven, concerns around the weakening of the US dollar. There's likely to be a Q4 rate cut by the Fed. And of course, if interest rates down, it means yields on treasuries or other types of alternate asset classes will probably come down. Gold seeing as a safer long-term alternative, and prices have gone up to $3,500 per ounce. So good for the gold market. We haven't seen these historic highs for a while. So let's see when the next historic high will be. That's it for my top picks from around the world. Now, for some other top stories from around the world, India is increasingly important to the U.S. as a key Asian security partner and a counterweight to China. But President Donald Trump's tariffs may be pushing it closer to Beijing instead. Xi Jinping told Narendra Modi, the Indian Prime Minister, that the world's two most populous countries should be partners rather than rivals, and that the dragon and the elephant should come together. Modi told Xi Jinping that they were committed to progressing relations based on mutual respect, trust, and sensitivities. Clearly, U.S. dynamics there pushing other nations closer together. Now in Switzerland, the country has entered the artificial intelligence race with the launch of a national large language model to provide an alternative to the likes of ChatGPT, Llama, and DeepSeek. Designed by leading Swiss universities, the Apatus LLM is comparable to Meta's Llama 3 model from 2024. And since then, Meta and other rivals have also produced more advanced versions. Kenya plans to offer 10 oil exploration blocks in the first licensing round since it adopted new legislation 6 years ago to govern the petroleum sector. In a phone interview on Monday, Mohamed Liban, the principal secretary for petroleum in Kenya, stated that of the 50 blocks in 4 sedimentary basins, 10 are ready for marketing. According to Petroleum Commissioner Joseph Otieno, the blocks available are located in the Anza and Lamu basins. Still in East Africa and the Horn, National Bank of Ethiopia Governor Mamo Miretu has resigned after serving in the role for only 2.5 years, during which he helped implement extensive reforms to overhaul the nation's economy. The Harvard graduate, who has led the National Bank of Ethiopia since 2023, has played a leading role in the reshaping of Ethiopia's economy over the last 7 years, including roles as the country's chief trade negotiator, with reforms including the opening up of the local banking and telecoms industry to foreign investors and competition. Nigeria has signed a production sharing contract with Total Energies and its local partner, South Atlantic Petroleum Sapetro, for 2 offshore blocks awarded during the 2024 licensing round, the country's upstream oil regulator said on Monday. The deal covers petroleum prospecting licenses 2000 and 2001 and spans about 2,000 square kilometers in the Niger Delta Basin. Total Energies holds an 80% contractor interest, while Sapetro holds 20%. The Nigerian Communications Commission has revealed that data consumption in the country hit an all-time high of 1.1 million terabytes in July 2025. According to the latest industry stat released by the Commission, the first milestone was hit in May when 1.04 million terabytes was used. The increase in consumption comes as more Nigerians move to higher generations of networks, 4G and 5G, leading to higher speeds. Nigeria's President Bola Ahmed Tinubu has announced that the federal government is no longer borrowing from domestic banks, citing a significant revenue breakthrough driven by non-oil sectors. The declaration came during a meeting with members of the Buhari organization led by former Nasarawa State Governor Senator Tanko Al-Makura at the presidential villa. Tinubu stated that Nigeria had met its annual revenue target by August, attributing the achievement to robust non-oil revenue performance. Well, that's it for our top stories.